Law number 15 is the law of victory. And the law of victory says leaders find a way for the team to win. In other words, leaders have the ability to bring victory to the people. In your notes, I have this statement: victorious leaders find the alternative to winning unacceptable. So they find out what needs to be done to achieve victory. And then they go after it with everything at their disposal. Now, if you'll let me just use a sports illustration just for a second, the classic example of somebody that understood the law of victory was Michael Jordan. He just had the ability to bring the team to victory. And even when he went over to the Washington team in the NBA, a team that had been lowly, they almost made the playoffs. Why? Because anything less than victory is unacceptable to Michael Jordan. You show me a person, a leader that does this law well, and I'll show you a person that absolutely hates losing. As I've looked at the great leaders in history, they all excelled in this law. Whether it's in our country, George Washington, who absolutely is determined to allow our country to be free from British rule, and stakes his life in 6 years, never hardly goes home to stay out there with his soldiers as they are undermanned and underrated to make sure that they bring this victory home, and finally he does. Whether it's a George Washington or an Abraham Lincoln who knows that the bloodiest time in our history is going to be a civil war, but he's willing to go through those dark hours so that we can eventually take this injustice off of our African American and friends and bring us to a new day. All of the great leaders understand and bring forth the law of victory. Perhaps my favorite leader of all is the leader of England, Winston Churchill, during World War II, who absolutely refused to allow the Nazis to gain control of Europe. And in the darkest hours spoke great words of victory to his people. I love the statement I have in your notes about him. Winston Churchill asked the question, what is our aim? I answer in one word: victory. Victory at all costs, victory in spite of all terror, victory however long and hard the road may be, for without victory there is no survival. So, what does the law of victory look like? Let's put a picture on it so we can understand it. Let's make the law of victory tangible. First of all, leadership is responsible. You show me a leader that brings his or her team to victory, and I'll show you a leader that takes responsibility. They take responsibility when defeat happens. They say, look, it was my problem, I was the leader. So the first part or component of the law of victory in leadership is that the leader takes responsibility. No excuses. Boy, don't you know some people? Every time there's a problem, they got 17 reasons why it's not them. Huh? If and but and if and but. If ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. The other day, I love this. I picked this up. This is just some true explanations why people had automobile accidents, as reported to the police when they were doing the report. And some of these excuses just cracked me up. Such as this person said, as I reached an intersection, a hedge sprang up. Hedges will do that often, obscuring my vision. Wasn't my fault. The hedge grew fast. An invisible car came out of nowhere, struck my car and vanished. The telephone pole was approaching fast. Those moving telephone poles do it every time. I attempted to swerve out of its path when it struck my front end. I hate it when telephone poles do that. The indirect cause of this accident was a little guy in a small car with a big mouth. I had been driving my car for 4 years when I fell asleep at the wheel and had an accident. After 4 years, you'll do that. I was on my way to the doctors with rear end trouble when my universal joint gave way, causing me to have an accident. To avoid hitting the bumper of the car in front, I struck the pedestrian. Makes perfect sense to me. I was coming home, pulled into the wrong driveway, and hit a tree that I did not have. The pedestrian had no idea which direction to run, so I ran over him. Make up your mind. Make up your mind. The guy was all over the road, and I had to swerve a number of times before hitting him. This was not easy. This was not an easy deal. I pulled away at the side of the road, glanced at my mother-in-law, and headed over the embankment. That's probably the only one that wasn't an excuse. Now, it's just simple. The law of victory says, very simple, leaders take responsibility. Own up. The second thing the law of victory looks like is losing is unacceptable. Losing is just not acceptable. Thirdly, passion is unquenchable. You show me a person in the law of victory, and I'll show you a person that is passionate about winning. Creativity is essential. Why? Because you're going to have to constantly be creative to work yourself out of messes to bring victory. Victory is not an escalator to the top. Quitting is unthinkable. They will not quit. Commitment is unquestionable. And because of those preceding things, victory is inevitable. That's just a fact. I'm very fortunate because I have people around me who understand this law very well. And in my inner circle, they really do understand the law of victory. David Sutherland, who's the president of Enjoy Stewardship Services, that's an organization that raises money for nonprofit organizations. David, I many times go to him and I say, David, of all the people I know, you are Mr. Law of Victory. You don't allow my team to lose. You don't allow my company to lose. You're going to make it happen. And I knew he was the law of victory when I brought him into my organization. It was very, very small. And it was right after Thanksgiving. I was over at the office one day and I saw his wife, Roxine, and I noticed Dave was gone. And I said, Roxine, where's Dave? Well, he said, John, his goal was X amount of contracts this year, and he's 7 contracts short. So on Thanksgiving Day, he left and said, I hope to be home for Christmas. But I won't be home till I have the other 7 contracts. So Roxine said, I'm not sure when he'll be home. But when he comes home, he'll have the contracts. He came home 2 days before Christmas. All 7 of them signed. You see, Dave's a leader that isn't going to allow the team to lose. He just is not going to allow the team to lose. Kevin Small, who's the president of Enjoy, we got ready to put together a major leadership simulcast all over America with some of the major players such as Jack Welch and Rudy Giuliani and that whole process. And I can remember the day that Kevin came to us and said, I want to do this simulcast. And my brother and I looked at him and said, well, it's going to take a lot of money and we're going to have to probably have a cash flow issue. And the only way we're going to let you do that is if you go out. And we threw out, we said, you're just going to have to get leaders like Jack Welch or Rudy Giuliani for us to do this simulcast because you're just going to have to make it so great that everybody's going to want to watch it. And he disappeared. And I went to his assistant. I said, where's Kevin? She said, he went after Jack Welch and Rudy Giuliani. Said he would be back when he had him. 8 days later, he came back with signed contracts. Jack Welch, Rudy Giuliani, and an all-star team of lineup. You see, Kevin understands. He understands the law of victory. It's just a very simple law. It's a law that basically says, if you're a leader, you realize your responsibility isn't to get across the line first. Your responsibility is to take everybody that's on your team across the line. You see, The law of victory is not an individual award. The law of victory is not an individual trophy. It basically says because you got across the line and helped everybody else get across the line, you took everybody on your team to a higher level. The law of victory says, yes, you won, but so did all the players around you. The law of victory can probably be expressed best in the words of Bill Russell, who said after every basketball game with the Boston Celtics, which he led to many world championships, he said, after every game, I evaluate my game not based on how well I played. I evaluate my game on how well the players around me played, because he said my main job is to make them all just a little bit better. So the law of victory is not a single award for a single person doing a single job. No, no, no. You see, you're a leader. And leaders don't go to the top by themselves. Oh, they go to the top. But when they go to the top, they're like my friend Jim Winokur, who took 20 people to the top of Mount Everest. He said, the greatest joy is not getting there myself. Once I did it, I knew I could do it. Now the question is, can I bring victory to everybody else? That's the law of victory. Law number 16 is the law of the Big Mo. The law of the Big Mo says momentum is a leader's best friend. I have found this to be very true. In fact, with momentum, here's what I have found. With momentum, you can solve problems so much easier than if you don't have momentum. So let's talk about it for a moment, and grab hold of your notes for a moment, and I'll walk you through some fill-in-the-blank stuff, and then I want to do some teaching. First of all, many times the only difference between winning and losing is momentum. Let's understand what momentum will do for you. Just as the law of intuition gets a leader started quicker so that that leader can win the race, the law of momentum sustains the victory longer. Momentum allows you to be successful for a longer period of time. An expression they use in the sports world, and you've all heard it, is when a team has got momentum, the sportscasters will say something about like they're playing over their heads. What's it mean when they say they're playing over their heads? What it really means is they've got momentum going for them. And when they got momentum going for them, things began to turn out great. And here's why. In your notes, momentum is the great exaggerator. In other words, momentum takes what is and exaggerates it. Stay with me in your notes. Momentum makes leaders look better than they are. That's why I call it a leader's best friend. In other words, think about it for a moment. Just stop for a moment. When you've got momentum, people think you're better than you really are. And isn't it fun to be a leader and have your people think you're really better than you really are? You know, and they're just saying, oh my goodness, what a leader. And you realize that you're not quite that good. Now, you don't want to stop the momentum and tell people that. But it's a great exaggeration. It makes the leader look better than he or she is. And momentum makes followers perform better than they are. It allows followers to perform more than that. So what you always want to do is you always want to have momentum, because momentum is the leader's best friend. Now let me just do the reverse for this for a moment. When you have no momentum, or you have negative momentum, remember Paul Harvey is the one who said, you can tell you're on the road to success, it's uphill all the way. So every once in a while I run to people and say, you know what? This is just great. It just seems like everything's coming automatically. Well, that means they're going downhill. And it's only a matter of time. Now, let me tell you something. When you lack momentum, just as positive momentum exaggerates things in a positive way, negative momentum exaggerates things in a negative way. So, no momentum makes leaders look worse than they are, and no momentum makes followers perform worse than they are. In other words, momentum is the great exaggerator. If you've got it, you look better than you really are. If you don't have it, you look worse than you really are. Now, what I want you to understand about momentum is this. With momentum, it takes less energy to solve problems. What discourages organizations more than anything else is problems. What discourages people more than anything else is problems. And so what happens is that when problems begin to bog you down, it seems like momentum begins to ebb. Now, the reason for that is the fact that the problem becomes bigger than the momentum instead of the momentum becoming bigger than the problem. So let me explain to you the difference. Here's the difference. What I have found in teaching leadership is this. Managers deal mostly with problems. That's just the nature of who management is. They deal a lot with problems. And nothing wrong with that because you got to deal with problems. Where management deals with problems and works on problems, what I found is leaders, they work on momentum. Leaders know that if they can create momentum, many of the problems they have in their organization will be solved. Let me explain to you what I mean. Here we go. A train going down the track 55 miles an hour. I mean, that train's just come. A train going down the track 55 miles an hour can crash through a 5-foot thick concrete wall, steel reinforced. It'll crash through that concrete wall and just keep on going. Why? Because it has momentum. It's moving down the tracks. A 5-foot thick concrete wall, steel reinforced, can't stop that train because it has momentum. That same train stopped dead on the track without any momentum at all. You can put a 1-inch block in front of the driving wheels, and that same train that could crash through a 5-foot thick concrete wall, steel reinforced, that same train with a 1-inch block in front of its driving wheels cannot even get started. This is a huge example of momentum. It works the same in companies. If you've got momentum in your company, you know what you can be doing if you've got momentum? You can smash through a 5-foot thick concrete wall, steel reinforced problem and keep on going. If you don't have momentum in your company, you know what happens? I can promise you, if you don't have momentum in your company, there could be a 1-inch problem and you can't even get started. That's why I tell people all the time, your problem is not your problem. In fact, the problem is, people think the problem is the problem. And the problem is not a problem, but because you think the problem is the problem, you work on a problem that's not a problem, and the problem wasn't a problem, now becomes a problem, not because it was a problem, but the problem is you didn't know the problem wasn't a problem, so the problem that was a problem has become a problem because you didn't know the problem wasn't a problem. So now you have a problem that wasn't a problem that is now your problem because you didn't know the problem wasn't the problem. Some melancholic in the back is raising her hand saying, John, could you repeat that one more time? I didn't quite get all of it. I didn't get it. Now, here's what I'm saying, very simple. You can either spend your life working on problems, or you can spend your life creating momentum. If you're going to be a leader, you're going to create momentum, I guarantee you. You're going to create momentum because you know that momentum will solve almost all of your problems. Here's the way this works. Momentum will solve your problems, but if you deal with problems, you'll never get momentum. So you've got to get on the momentum side, and leaders understand that. Leaders realize that you've got to work on momentum. If you want to be successful, you've got to work on momentum. That's just where it is. So, because see, there are two kinds of people, and this is so important. It's in your notes because I want you to be sure to get it. There are two kinds of people. First of all, leaders are like thermostats. They control the temperature. And followers are like thermometers. They record the temperature. And you got to ask yourself the question, am I going to set the temperature? Am I going to create momentum as a leader? Or am I basically going to go around and record what the temperature is like most followers? And this is a very important issue. So what I want to do is I want to talk to you about if momentum is so important because it helps solve most of the problems in the organization, how do I, as a leader, create momentum for my company? How do I create it for my department? How do I create it for my organization? How do you move the big mo? In the Laws of Teamwork book, one of the 17 laws of teamwork that I write about is the law of the big mo. I talk about morale. I talk about high morale. And you know what I say about high morale? When you're winning, nothing hurts. Isn't that the truth? Boy, you see a team winning. You don't see a team walking slowly off the football field. Oh, it was a rough game. No, they're jumping up and down. They're excited. You know why? Because they got the big mo. They've got momentum. When you're winning, nothing hurts. Can I tell you something? When you don't have momentum, it works like this. When you're losing, everything hurts. Isn't that the truth? So how do you move the big mo? How do you get it going? Number one, understand its value. Understand the value of momentum. As a leader, you've got to understand, and the best way I can explain it, if you'll let me use a sports analogy again, what happens to coaches? Well, let's say, for example, I'm coaching and my team is losing, and all of a sudden we've lost momentum, and the other team is pouring up, just pouring on the points. Okay, what do teams that are losing momentum, what's the coach do when the team starts losing momentum? Calls timeout. Now, why did the coach call timeout? Very simple. They realized that momentum is getting away from them. I wish every leader would understand what a coach understands. When you're losing momentum in your organization, call timeout. It's time to huddle. It's time to talk about the issues. Don't put your head in the sand and act like it's not happening. Say, look, we're not doing well. Let's talk about it. Let's turn this around. Let's get the big mo going for us. So, number one, understand its value. Number two, figure out what the motivating factors are in your organization. Just figure them out. There are certain things in your organization that motivate your people. You say, as a leader, I don't know what they are. It's very simple. Ask your group. Get to your team. If this is my leadership team, I'm going to go down. I'm going to say, okay, let me ask you a question. What motivates you? What really gets you excited? What gives you energy? They're going to tell you. They'll tell you what motivates them. They'll tell you what momentum they need in their life to go forward. So figure out the motivating factors. Number three, remove the demotivating factors in your organization. Now, we just did the opposite. You're feeding in the motivating factors, For example, I may be talking to my team. Hey, what's your name? John, I may be talking to my team, and I say, okay, John, let me ask you a question, John. What demotivates you? And John may say, you know what? In our company, it takes too long for me to get an answer. Man, 3 weeks ago, I wanted to know about something. I'm still waiting on the answer. All the bureaucracy and all the stuff, all the paperwork, I hate that stuff. And so I say, okay, John, one of your demotivating factors, obviously, is bureaucracy and too much paperwork. So what do I do as a leader? I say, okay, let's see how we can give you direct lines so you can get your answers. Okay, what I'm saying is leaders instill motivating factors to get the momentum going, and they remove demotivating factors. Number four, schedule times for direction and celebration. In other words, when you win, have a party. And when you have the party, always give them direction for the next step. One of the greatest mistakes I find in celebrating is too many organizations celebrate and it's just an end in itself. When you have a party over a victory, at the end of that party, say, you know what? Let me share with you where we want to go next. Always give direction at your celebration times. Always say, this is our next level. This is where we're going to go. Because the people already have momentum. They feel they can win. They feel successful. They feel good about themselves. They've got a victory under the belt. That's the time to give them the next challenge. Number five, recognize and honor people who move the ball forward. Very simply put, find the people who move the ball forward, give them the credit, recognize them, get them up in front of the people. Very important. And by the way, if they're not moving the ball forward, don't applaud. It amazes me in so many organizations how we affirm people that aren't doing a good job. You've never seen a coach, when a ball player fumbled, stand on the sidelines and clap and say, "That a way to go." No. So you recognize and affirm those who are doing the job. And number six, practice what I call character leadership. And I would define character leadership this way. Character leadership is when I lead with enthusiasm and hope, and the future doesn't seem very bright. In other words, the average person, when things don't look good, they sag. Leaders, they suck it up and move forward and get positive, and they lead whether they feel good or not. Quit waiting to feel good to lead. Quit waiting for your first victory. If you've had a loss, put it behind you. Keep going. Have character leadership. Understand that as you go, so will the team go. Law number 17, the law of priorities. The law of priorities says that leaders understand that activity is not necessarily accomplishment. So let's talk about that for a moment. Activity is not necessarily accomplishment. Some of these laws I do better on than others, and there are some laws that I excel more than others. I want to just say that probably of the 21 laws, this is my best law. I really do understand the law of priorities. And so let me give you a little bit of background. I'm working on a business degree in Indiana back in 1971, 72, in college. And I read in a textbook about the Pareto principle. A guy named Alfredo Pareto. It was the first time that I ever was introduced to what is known sometimes as the 80-20 principle. The first time that I've ever was introduced to it, and basically Pareto taught in that one paragraph in that book about priorities. And I remember reading that paragraph and saying to myself, this is very important to me. I need to learn priorities the way Pareto taught them. And so I became a student of Pareto. I became a student of priorities. And that was, my goodness, that was well over 30 years ago. And I can tell you that when people look at what little things that I've been able to accomplish, and they come and say, how can you accomplish so much? I can always tell them with great integrity, this law right here, the law of priorities, I have worked on and I have excelled in. So let's look at your notes, because this is a terrific law to teach. I've already got a diagram for you, so let's just look at the diagram for a second. On the left-hand column is priorities. And by the way, since I'm doing some teaching on this, I want you to put a slice there, and I want you to also put the word people. Because I'm going to teach you priorities, but I'm also going to teach you how to prioritize your people in about 5 minutes. So, but for now, the left-hand column is priorities, and the right-hand column is production, and it pretty well explains itself. Here's what Pareto says. Pareto says that if you have 10 things to do, and you prioritize those 10 things correctly, if you only do 2 of them, but you do the top 2, you're going to get an 80% return on everything you need in your life. It's very obvious. You do 2 things, you go to the production side, 80% return. That's huge. Pareto goes on and says, let's say instead of doing the top 2 things, you do the bottom 8. You ignore the top 2. The most important things you ignore, and you do the bottom 8. Here's what Pareto says. If you do the bottom 8, if you go to the production side, you can see you're only going to have a 20% return. That's why it's sometimes called the 80-20 principle or the 20-80 principle. It's really talking about how to prioritize your life. And Pareto says, if you prioritize your life correctly, if you do just the 2 things out of 10 that you need to do, the most important 2, 80% of everything you want in your business, I can tell you this works in your family. If you prioritize your family time right, 80% of everything you need in your family, it's going to happen if you understand how to work the top 20%. What I have found is most people don't understand the 20-80 principle, and so therefore they don't put the time, energy, and effort in the top 20%, so therefore they don't get the return. Now, this is a great principle, but there are 3 questions, priority questions, that you need to ask yourself, that I need to ask myself, that helps me to establish this top 20%. Question number 1, requirement. I've got to ask myself, what is required of me? In other words, I've got to look at my job. I've got to look at my company, my organization, the one that I work for. There are certain job descriptions. There are certain requirements of the job. And I've got to basically say, okay, what do I have to do? Because whatever I have to do, I have to do it. If I don't do those, I'm fired. So it's got to be a priority. True? So I've got to ask what's required of me. The second word is return. I've got to look at all the things I do, and I have to ask myself this question, what gives me the greatest return? The third word is reward. I have to ask myself the question, what gives me the greatest reward? Now, those 3 questions I have found to be huge in understanding the 20-80 principle. But Alfredo Pareto says that if you prioritize your life correctly and you do the top 20%, you get an 80% return. And on that top 20%, I have to have those 3 R's. What's required of me, what gives me the highest return, and what gives me the greatest reward. See, I've got to ask the requirement question because if I don't do that, well, then I'm out of a job. I've got to ask the return job question because if I don't do that well, I'm not going to produce. And I've got to ask the reward job because if I don't like what I'm doing and I continually do it, it's only a matter of time till I'll quit. Requirement, return, reward. Let me illustrate it. I only have 4 things that I have to do. If fact, when I tell people that I only have 4 priorities, they look at me, they just kind of look at me and say, what do you mean you only do 4 things? What I mean is I only do 4 things. They said, well, no, I mean, don't you do other things? No, read my lips. Now, the reason I only do 4 things is a lot of reasons. One is I understand priorities. Number 2 is I'm kind of worthless in most things in life. It's just a gift, so it's not yours, so don't worry about it. Okay. But worthless I am. But the 4 things I do very well. And my whole team understands this. And they do everything around me so that I can stay focused on these 4 areas, because these 4 areas bring a huge return to me and to my companies that I have. So let me give you the 4 things. I'm only giving you these 4, not because these are going to be your 4, because they're not going to be. But you're going to have to go through the process, which literally took me months to go through, until you can settle in what your strengths are, what you need to be spending your time with. My 4 priorities, very simple. Number 1 is leadership. I lead well, so I spend a lot of time leading. It's a gift, and I know it. Number 2 is communication. I do it almost every day. I speak places, I lecture, I teach. I do a lot of communication. Why? Because it's a strength. The 3rd is create or /write. I spend a lot of time creative thinking. I spend a lot of time in writing. Again, why? Because it's a strength of mine. I love to write books so that I can add value to people that I'll probably never meet. And the 4th area is in networking or relationships. Now, those are the 4 things I do. I either lead, communicate, create, or relate with other people. Those are the 4 things. I don't do anything else. You say, John, why don't you do anything else? Because I'm not any good at anything else. You've got to play to your strengths, not to your weaknesses. It's very important for you to understand. Listen to me carefully. People don't pay for average. They haven't paid for average in your life. They're not going to pay for average in my life. People don't pay for average. So quit trying to be average. Find out what you do well. Stay to your strengths, because that's the ace. That's what's going to bring you home. Now, these 4 areas, these are the 4 areas I stay in. I don't do anything else. Now, I have to have a lot of things done, so I have players around me that they complete me, and they do things for me that are huge on the team that are vitally important. Now, I'm not saying these are the only 4 important things. I'm just saying, for me, these are the 4 things that I do, and these are my 4 top priorities. These give me the greatest return. These give me the greatest reward. You see, what Pareto is teaching you and me are the following lessons. He's teaching us, first of all, it's not how hard you work, it's how smart you work. He's teaching us that it's not how much time you put in the job, it's how you prioritize the job to be effective in it. He's teaching us things such as organize or agonize. In other words, get your act together and get organized, or you're going to always be behind the 8 ball and you're going to be agonizing because you're trying to always catch up. He's saying things such as choose or lose. Either you choose your priorities or you'll lose your priorities to somebody else that will choose them for you. The question is not will your calendar be full. The question is who will fill your calendar. He's saying things like evaluate or stalemate. Evaluate your priorities on a consistent basis, or if you don't, you're going to plateau, you're going to stalemate before long. Now, before I close this incredible law of priorities, let's go back to the diagram one more time. I want you to, instead of looking at priorities on the left-hand column, I want you to look at people. I wish I had 30 minutes to teach this part of the lesson. I'll try to do it in 30 seconds. If you have 10 people in your organization, or let's say you have 100 and each number represents 10, here's what Pareto says. If you have 100 people in your organization, if you prioritize them according to effectiveness in your company, 20 of those 100 people would be giving you 80% return on everything you need in your organization. And the other 80 would be giving you a 20% return. And what Pareto would be saying to you and me as leaders is, you better prioritize your people. And what he would be saying is, once you prioritize them according to effectiveness, here's what Pareto would say is, he would say, spend 80% of your time with the top 20% of your people, because that's where the return is. Let me tell you what our biggest mistake is as leaders. I see it happening all the time. Instead of spending 80% of our time with our top 20%, do you know who we spend 80% of our time with? The bottom 20%. Because they've got questions and they want help and they've got an owie and oh, it's tough. We say, well, the top 20%, they don't need my time. The bottom 20%, they need your time. Listen. You've got to decide whether you're going to be a counselor or an equipper. If you're a counselor, you're going to work with the bottom 20%. If you're an equipper, you're going to work with the top 20%. If you're a counselor, you're going to work on the weaknesses of people. If you're an equipper, you're going to work on the strengths of people. And I'll discuss that in another law coming up. Well, the law of priorities is absolutely huge. Basically, Pareto says, get your act together. Prioritize your life, prioritize your people, prioritize your time, and give 80% of the time to the top 20%, and you'll get a huge return. Law number 18 is the law of sacrifice. And the law of sacrifice says a leader must give up to go up. In fact, I can remember several years ago now doing a leadership lesson entitled, You Have to Give Up to Go Up. And into that lesson, I can remember my outline because it was very simple. I said, first of all, and it was about getting up to the top, and I said, first of all, you have to get up to go up. Because I know all kind of people, they're still in bed. You know what I mean? They're still in bed. They haven't realized, you probably ought to get out of bed before you can be successful. You got to get up to go up. That's step number one, get out of bed. Enter in the arena of action. Take some initiative. Do something. Okay, you got to get up to go up. And after you get up to go up, after you do that, secondly, you got to grow up to go up. You got to grow up. I know people who have never matured. They're still talking about the same thing, doing the same thing. They've never developed like to. So if you want to get to the top, you not have to get up to go up. You got to grow up to go up. And then in the tape, I remember I talked thirdly in the leadership lesson about, well, you got to give up to go up. And that's what we're going to talk about in just a moment. And then the last thing I said is you need to gather up to grow up. You need to get your team together. If you really want to go to the top, you've got to gather up people because as I teach in the laws of teamwork, law number 4, the law of Mount Everest says, as the challenge escalates, the need for teamwork elevates. In other words, you've got to get a team around you, and you've got to get that team helping you to get to the top. So let's talk about the law of sacrifice. A few years ago, there was a tragedy at Mount Everest where a couple of guides got into a storm with a few of their people, and there were a few deaths. And I can remember a 60-minute interview that I watched. It was a very interesting interview because they were talking to one of the guides who, of course, lived, and they were talking about the tragedy. I think it was Mike Wallace, if I'm not mistaken, in that interview, and he asked a couple of questions that especially arrested my attention. One of the questions he asked was, why do you risk your life to take people to the top? And I remember the guide said, well, it's because that's my job. My job is to take people to the top. That's why they call me a guide. And Mike Wallace says, well, couldn't you get to the top by yourself without harm or injury? And oh yes, I could do that. But it's my job to take people to the top. And the guide kept coming back to Mike Wallace and said, it's my responsibility. That's who I am. I'm a guide. And when I listened, I thought, how true to a leader that is. It's our job as leaders to take people to the top. Mike Wallace continued that interview, and then he looked at me and said, I don't think it's worth the risk. I mean, after all, to risk your life or have people in your party that not make it to the top, he said, I don't think it's worth the risk. And then he looked at the guy and said, why do you risk your life to get to the top of the mountain? And I'll never forget, that guide looked at him, and when Mike Wallace asked that question, the guide is looking into his face like, I can't believe you would ask me that question. Why do I risk my life to get to the top? He looked at Mike Wallace and said, it's obvious to me that you've never been to the top of Mount Everest. It's obvious to me. You've never been to the top of the mountain. It's obvious that you've never been there. If you would have ever been to the top, you would never ask that question. When I think of that interview, I think of leaders. Once we have been to the top and see how glorious it is, what do we want to do? We want to go back down and we want to find some other people and say, I want you to take a trip with me. I'm going to show you things you have never seen. I'm going to give you experiences that you have never experienced. That's what leaders do. Leaders have been to the top and they want to take as many people with them to the top as they possibly can. Now, here's what I want you to understand. To get to the top, you've got to give up something. It was Emerson who said, for everything you gain, you must lose something. That's why I have in your workbook what I call the leadership pyramid. The leadership pyramid is a prime example of giving up to going up. Basically, the leadership pyramid says that when you enter an organization, I guess you got all kind of options left and right, but as you become a leader, and as you become a leader in that organization, the higher you go in this leadership pyramid, the less options you have. Now, I want to say that I teach this leadership pyramid all the time. I think that most leaders, and I think a lot of leaders in corporate America and in leadership organizations around the world, do not understand the leadership pyramid. For example, I run into leaders who all the time think that the higher they go, the more options they should have, the more perks they should have. I don't think so. I think the higher you go, the less options you have. I think that the greatest leaders are what I would call servant leaders. They're leaders who understand that they're a leader to make it better for the people. You're not a leader to make it better for yourself. Now, if you're a good leader, it will be better for you because you'll have the joy of taking people across the finish line. And there's no greater fulfillment and joy than that. So if you are a leader and you're taking people across the top, it's going to be very good. But what I want you to understand is this. You don't lead because of perks. In fact, what I have found is this. Most leaders, they become leaders because they like the perks of leadership, but most people have not counted the price of leadership. What you're going to have to give up, what you're going to pay. My dad taught me when I was just a kid. He said, John, pay now, play later. That's the way it works. And he said, if you don't pay on the front end, you don't get a play on the back end. In fact, he said, I'll never forget this. He said, John, the longer you wait to pay the price, the higher it becomes. So learn quickly, pay on the front end. And I'm saying to each one of us today, as we're teaching this principle, the law of sacrifice, what we've got to do is we've got to understand that we have to pay on the front end. There's a price to pay to be a leader. It's not always easy. It's not always fun. In fact, when I teach leadership, one of the things I'm most concerned about is, why do you want to become a leader? Do you want to become a leader because you think there are a lot of perks in it for you? Or do you want to become a leader because you want to add value to people and take them to a higher level than they could ever go on their own? So let's go to the workbook. Because there are 3 sacrifice statements that I want to make. Number 1, there is no success without sacrifice. Let's just start there. You say, John, what do you mean? What I mean is, there is no success without sacrifice. There's not an escalator waiting to take you to the top. Quit standing outside waiting for the chairlift to take you to the top. Nobody ever got to the top of a mountain and at the end of the day said, oh my goodness, how did I get here? Instead of saying, I just took a stroll and the next thing I knew, I was on top of this mountain. No. You can fall off the top by accident, but you can't roll to the top by accident. If you get to the top, it's because you gave up something. And let me tell you something that all experienced mountain climbers will tell you. Before they take that big trip to the top, the main question they ask themselves is, what are the essentials I must take with me? Because they know anything except essentials will be a detriment to keeping them from what that goal is. So when they get ready to go to the top, they don't back up a U-Haul truck and say, I'm going to throw this stuff in the truck. I may need it while I'm up there. No, they give up. They give up to go up. So there is no success without sacrifice. Number 2, the higher the level of leadership, the greater the sacrifice. That's a fact. The higher you go in your leadership, the more you'll give up. I remember thinking when I started off in my career, in my business to go to success, I remember thinking in the very beginning, boy, I was willing to do anything to get to the top. Of course it was. I didn't have to give up anything. Hey, when you have no money, it's not hard to give it up. When you have no position or reputation, it's not hard to give it up. You say, well, why was I so foolish as a youth? You weren't foolish as a youth. You didn't have anything. But as you grow higher, one of the reasons many leaders never get to the top is because as they go higher, they get more stuff. And they have to make these trade-off decisions that become very difficult for them. The third thing I want you to know about success is you have to give up to stay up. You not only have to give up to go up, once you get on top, you have to give it up. The reason most sports teams can do consecutive world championships is because after they win their first world championship, all the players go on the chicken banquet tour. And they spend the next year getting fat, telling everybody how they did it last year. And you don't reproduce yourself by telling your story. You reproduce yourself. You stay on top by giving up continually. About 5 years ago, I did a lesson that really fits this whole law of sacrifice. It was entitled 10 Trade-Offs Worth Making. And I was at a very important part of my own career where I was 50 years old. And I was going to have to make some major changes, and I was going to have to give up some major wonderful perks and things I had in my life if I wanted to go to the next level. And I can remember that day as I sat down at my desk with my legal pad and I began to look at the trade-offs. Trade-offs such as I was willing to give up affirmation. People tell me what a good job I was doing for accomplishment to get to a next level. I was willing to give up financial gain for future potential. I was willing to give up immediate pleasure for personal growth. I was willing to give up the quantity of life for quality of life. I was willing to give up security for significance. I was willing to give up acceptance for excellence. I was willing to give up addition for multiplication. I began to work through all these things I was willing to give up. And I can remember making the conscious decision to keep on going. But I also remember, as I looked at that list, I realized that the higher you go, the price gets higher. That's why many people get about 2/3 of the way up and never climb any higher. The 19th law of the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership is the law of timing. And the law of timing says when to lead is as important as what to do and where to go. Now, I've already shared with you that of the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, there are 2 laws that are tough to teach. There are 2 laws that are tough to learn. One was the law of intuition. This one, the law of timing, is the second difficult law to learn. The law of timing, the law of intuition, again, migrate to what we call natural leaders. They're the ones who have those leadership leanings that basically allows them to intuitively feel the subjective side, the artistic side of leadership, that just kind of allow them to kind of sense their way through. And the law of timing is so essential to a leader's success. That's like one of the great songs, You got to know when to hold them. Got to know when to fold them. I love the classics, don't you? Huh? Yes. Don't you love the classics? You got to know when to walk away. I think Sir Kenny Rogers did that one. And he was basically saying that there is a sense of timing, there's a sense of intuitiveness that's going to determine your success or your failure. And I want to emphasize that in this law of timing. Many people have been successful in their leadership because they understood the law. Many people have been unsuccessful because they violated the law of timing. In your notes, let me share with you how this law of timing works. The wrong action at the wrong time equals disaster. We've seen that. Very simple. A leader makes a wrong decision, wrong time, timing's wrong, decision's wrong, disaster. You got a titanic issue on your lap. Now, the wrong action at the right time equals a mistake. Now you can see that already it's better. It's still not good, but if the timing was right, even though the action was wrong, it's not as disastrous. Now, the right action at the wrong time equals resistance. People are resistant. Even if it's the right thing to do, if your timing is wrong, you'll find that they're not accepting. You'll find that they're resisting you. Does that make sense? Finally, and this is where you all want to land because this is basically the law of timing. The law of timing is number 4. The right action at the right time equals success. And a classic example in history, in presidential history, of the law of timing is Jimmy Carter. When Jimmy Carter became president, he became president because the country was tired of Washington insiders. Think about it. Watergate, Nixon, Gerald Ford, who pardoned him. Basically, America was saying, we're tired of the Washington insiders. We need somebody that doesn't live in Washington, doesn't go to Washington. And here came Jimmy Carter, the peanut farmer from Georgia. Remember, he had his coat over his shoulder and, "Hi, my name is Jimmy Carter." And we just kind of looked at him and we said, you know, he's the guy I'm going to vote for. Because he doesn't go to Washington. He doesn't look like Washington. He doesn't talk like Washington. We need Jimmy Carter in there. And he literally was elected president because of the law of timing. America was tired of Washington insiders. Now, he was president for 4 years. And during that time, it was not a good time. Interest rates got to 20%. Remember the hostages? Oh, the hostages. Iran took our people hostage, and we didn't get them out. And when we tried to get them out, our helicopters crashed, and it just seemed like we were just bungling everything. Now, things were not going good. Do you remember Ronald Reagan? He had this wonderful, charismatic smile, and all of a sudden we thought, boy, we need somebody that's a little happy, because Jimmy Carter was saying, perhaps the best days in America are behind us. We needed a happy boy. We got Ronald. Literally, when Ronald Reagan was being sworn in as President of the United States, at the moment of his being sworn in, the hostages were being released. It's all the law of timing. And leaders that are successful leaders, they understand the law of timing. They understand when there's a time for action, hey, and there's a time for them to be patient. There's a time to move forward. There's a time to stop. There's a time for thinking. There's a time for talking. They understand this whole law of timing. In Jimmy Carter's situation, timing was a double-edged sword. It took him into office. It took him out of office. What I have found is the best leaders understand the double-edgedness of the sword, but they understand how to use it for the benefit of their organization. Because timing requires the following 7 things. Number 1, understanding. You have to be able to see the big picture. Number 2 is maturity. Very seldom are immature people good with timing. It's their immaturity that causes them to want to rush things. 3 is confidence. I have found that, especially when you have to hold them, that you have to have confidence. You have to believe in yourself. Number 4 is decisiveness, the ability to make decisions quickly, because here's what I found about timing. Timing doesn't wait. Timing doesn't say, it's a good time, I'll wait a while. No, it's in and it's out. Number 5 is experience. And the more successful experience you have under your belt, the better your timing is. And number 6 is intuitiveness. And intuitiveness and timing are first cousins. They always work together. And number 7 is preparation. There's a lot to say about how preparation helps us with the law of timing. I think it was Abraham Lincoln who said, I will prepare and someday my time will come. He understood the value of opportunity. I just did a conference called Reality Leadership. And in Reality Leadership, I talked about the 4 toughest realities that leaders face. And one of those 4 realities is producing positive change within an organization. And we used a case study in that lecture. And the young man who was in the case study spoke about the fact that several things had happened in his organization, and he was getting ready to relocate his company. And finally said, I knew it was time to lay it on the line. In other words, I knew it was time to ask for the big decision, the big vote. I knew it was time for us to make the big move. And what I'd like to do in closing this law with you is I would like to give you some indicators of how do you know in the area of timing when it is the appropriate time to make the big decision. How do I know when as a leader I lay it on the line and say, hey, okay, gang, let's go forward? Number one, after you have defined reality. Don't lay anything on the line. Don't ask for any decision in the area of timing until you've defined reality, until you really can say, this is what I know is true about our company and true about our organization. After you have defined reality, that's when you lay it on the line. Number two, after you have identified the issues. In other words, after you've not only seen what reality is, but you identified every one of the issues that are going to need to be hurdles that you can overcome before you can make the big change or the final decision. Number three, after you have met with the influencers. Remember, we've illustrated in other laws that you've got to meet with your influencers, you've got to meet with your inner circle, you've got to meet with your key players and have the meeting before the meeting. So after you have met with your influencers, that's when you can make the big decision, because timing then will be appropriate. Number four, after you've received buy-in from them. Just like the buy-in that says, the law of buy-in that says people buy into the leader before they buy into the vision, you've got to have buy-in from your influencers again before you can make the big decision and make the big change. Number five, after you've communicated the vision. You only lay it on the line. You only understand the timing of an important decision after you've communicated vision. And number six, after you've modeled the behavior that you desire in others. You've got to model that behavior because people do what people see. So after you've modeled the behavior that you want to see in others, that's when you begin to lay it on the line. And number seven, after you have overcome each one of those issues. You've not only identified the issues, but you've overcome those issues. And now, all of a sudden, you're becoming successful, and you can point to your success and say, look how well we're achieving. Now, after you do those 7 things, then you lay it on the line. Then you make the decision. It's a timing issue. And again, great decision makers understand that the timing of the decision is as important as the decision itself. Remember this, the right decision done at the right time equals success. That's what the law of timing is all about. Knowing how to maximize your profits and knowing when to cut your losses. You can't hang on to your losses too long. That's the law of timing. Law number 20 is the law of explosive growth, and the law of explosive growth says leaders who develop leaders multiply. In other words, to add growth, you've got to have followers. But to multiply growth, you've got to have leaders. And this is a law that talks about how to have explosive growth, and basically the law says you've got to get on the leadership side. And there's a difference between what I call followers math and leaders math. Followers math is addition. Leaders math is multiplication. And what you've got to do is you've got to understand in this law that if you want to multiply, you've got to get on the leadership side. So what I've done is I've made a study of this question because I've asked myself this question often. I've asked myself this question often. Why is it that some leaders develop leaders and some leaders develop followers? And I have come to the conclusion that there are some distinct differences between leaders who develop followers and leaders who develop leaders. And I want to give you today those distinct differences because you're going to see them for yourself as I begin to relay them to you. For example, number 1, desire. There's a difference in the desire of leaders who develop followers versus leaders who develop leaders. So let me explain that. Leaders who develop followers need to be needed. In other words, they want people to need them. They love the fact that followers say, oh my goodness, I need you, I couldn't make it without you. They love that. So leaders who develop followers, they need to be needed, where leaders who develop leaders want to be succeeded. And there's a world difference between those two. You see, leaders who develop leaders, they say, my goodness, I hope somebody will succeed me. I hope somebody will rise above me. I hope somebody will do better than I do. Boy, I hope I pour my life into somebody that someday they're way up here and I can look and say, look, I helped develop them. Leaders who develop leaders want to be succeeded. Leaders who only develop followers, they just want to be needed. They want those followers to tell them how important they are, and I couldn't make it without you, and you've made my life. They want to hear that. It's very ego-satisfying. You see, leaders who develop followers to get their ego satisfaction from people that need them. Leaders who develop leaders get their ego satisfaction out of watching the people they've developed literally pass them up. By the way, that's why more leaders develop followers than leaders who develop leaders. It's the difference in the desire. Ask yourself the question, what's my desire? Do I desire to have people just stroke me and tell me how good I am, or do I have a desire to reproduce myself and develop leaders around me, some of them which will undoubtedly be quicker, better, faster, and smarter than me? My goal is to have people that I develop pass me up. What's your desire? Because what your desire is will determine whether you develop leaders or develop followers. Number 2, focus. The focus is different. Let me explain. Leaders who develop followers focus on the weaknesses of people. And leaders who develop leaders, they focus on the strengths of people. Major difference. You see, if you and I focus on the weaknesses of people, we'll work with people in a sense of counseling. If we work on the strengths of people, we'll work with people in the area of equipping. And let me just say something about working on weaknesses versus working on strengths, because this is a fact. I've said in a previous law, people don't pay for average. When I work on my weaknesses, or when you work on your weaknesses, let's say from a 1 to 10, I'm a 2 in something, which is very weak. And I say, oh my goodness, I'm going to really work on this. Can I tell you something? I can go from a 2 to maybe a 3. Perhaps if I really work hard, spend a lot of time and energy, maybe I can get to a 4. Can I tell you something? If I work hard, I go from a 2 to a 4. The good news is I've made progress. The bad news is nobody will pay for it, because people don't pay for average. You don't pay for average. I don't pay for average. Think about it. When's the last time you went into your house and you looked at your wife and said, hey, babe, let's go out to an average restaurant? Man, it's just let's go to an average restaurant. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could go to an average restaurant? And so you go to an average restaurant, you pull up to the average restaurant, and you go in and sit at an average table. And you look and say, boy, I really hope an average waiter takes care of us. Man, we don't want a good waiter. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if we got a waiter that, forgot to look at us once in a while and didn't come around and refill the drink? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we just had a waiter that, messed up the order? Not both orders, but one of the orders, just average. You know what I'm saying? We don't want to mess up both orders. Wouldn't it be, an average meal at an average restaurant with an average waiter? I mean, it can't get any more average than that. And once you're done with that, you say, oh, wasn't that fun? Hey, we got some time. Got an idea? Hey, let's go to an average movie. Let's go to an average movie. Let's see. Now, honey, is there any movie that none of our friends have been talking about? You know what I mean? Because you know what? You go to an average movie, you always have plenty of seats. Oh, I love that. I love that. And after we've gone to an average movie, we can go home, we can look at each other and say, hadn't it been wonderful? We spent together an average evening together in an average restaurant with an average waiter, with average food, and an average movie. Oh, what a wonderful average day. I love life. Boy, I hope tomorrow I can just do some more average things. People don't pay for average. The question I have is, why do so many people like it? Why do you like it? Why do you want to be average? Don't work on your weaknesses, because if you work on your weaknesses, I promise you, you'll just be average. Let's say from a 1 to a 10, let's say you're a 6 at something, and you work at a 6, and you go up to 7 to an 8. Now all of a sudden, you're up there at 8. Now, can I tell you something? When you get to be an 8 or a 9, people pay to hear you. People pay to see you. People pay to listen to you. People pay to talk to you. People pay to find out what you're thinking. You see, you got to play to your strengths. Don't play to your weaknesses. I know. Our whole culture has said, work on your weaknesses. Our whole culture is wrong. Don't work on your weaknesses. They taught us that if you got an A in math and a C in English, you worked on English. You're always going to be bad in English. Trust me, I know. I love to sing. That's the good news. The bad news is I'm not any good at it. So I'm a 2 on singing. But I want to sing, so what do? I get a music teacher, and I take vocal lessons, and I take sight reading, and I spend 3 or 4 years. Can I tell you something? When I'm done 3 or 4 years from now, I don't know. Okay, so I was a 2, maybe now I'm a 3. Here's what I know. None of you in this room, none of you, not even my mother, is going to say, hey, I'd love to pay to hear John sing. No. You'll pay to shut me up, not to hear me sing. You see, leaders who develop leaders, they're equippers. They look for the strengths in their people and they work on them. Leaders who develop followers, they work on weaknesses and never get a return on the weaknesses of their people and wonder why their company is not successful. Number 3, priorities. You see, the priorities of leaders who develop followers and leaders who develop leaders are different. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. Leaders who develop followers devote attention to the bottom 20%. We've already studied the Pareto principle. And leaders who develop leaders, they devote attention to the top 20%. A world of difference. Number 4 is abilities. Leaders who develop followers are good leaders. But leaders who develop leaders are great leaders. Goes back to the law of respect, remember? It goes back to the law of magnetism. Sure it does. They're cousins, remember? If you're a 4 as a leader, you're only going to attract 3s. The quality of person that you're going to have in your organization isn't going to be any high. So leaders who develop followers are good leaders because perhaps that's all they can attract. But leaders who develop leaders, they're great leaders. They're going after those 7s, 8s, and 9s. Number 5, attitude. There's a difference in attitude. See, leaders who develop followers lift up themselves. They love to hear their people lift them up. But leaders who develop leaders lift others. They lift up others. Number 6 is in the area of time. Leaders who develop followers spend time with people. Leaders who develop leaders invest time with people. World of difference between those two. Number 7 is expectations. Leaders who develop followers ask for little commitment. Leaders who develop leaders ask for much commitment. That's a fact. Number 8, there's even a difference in leadership. Leaders who develop followers lead everyone the same. But leaders who develop leaders lead everybody differently. Because they realize that not all people are motivated by the same thing and have the same values. So they understand that you lead people according to who they are, not according to one similar plan for everybody. And finally, the 9th difference between leaders who develop followers and leaders who develop leaders is this one: impact. Leaders who develop followers impact this generation. And leaders who develop leaders, they impact the next generation. The 21st law of leadership and the final law. Somebody asked me one time, said, John, why did you write the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership? I said, because there are 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. If there had been 22, I would have written the 22 irrefutable laws of leadership. There's 21. And the last one is the law of legacy. And the law of legacy says a leader's lasting value is measured by succession. In fact, Max Dupree, who wrote a great book called Leadership is an Art, said succession is one of the key responsibilities of leadership. I'm often reminded when I think of the law of legacy of the relay race. I had a coach one time of a very successful track team tell me that when you're doing the relay race and you have 4 runners, he said, John, the race is always won or lost. When the competition is keen and good, the race is always won or lost in the exchange zone. Those few yards where one runner is reaching out to a runner that is running before him, trying to pass on the baton. He said, that's where the race is won. He said, the best coaches spend most time teaching the runners how to hand off the baton. In fact, he said, let me put it this way. Every other part of the race is individual. Every other part of the race is dependent upon a person's skill and speed and ability and giftedness. He said, there's no question about it. But when it comes to the exchange zone, that's when no longer are you running for yourself. You're running for somebody else. And your ability to put them in the best position. He said, a good exchange in the exchange zone can give a runner even up to, he said, sometimes up to a second, which can be the deciding difference in a competitive match. He said, John, teaching the runners how to go from one to the other, how to hand off that baton, he said, is absolutely essential. The law of legacy, the law of succession says that you and I need to know how to hand off the baton well to other leaders so that our work, our business, our company, our organization can live way beyond ourselves. In your notes, I write 4 things. Achievement comes when someone is able to do great things for himself or for herself. That's achievement. Success comes when he or she empowers followers to do great things with them. Significant comes when he develops leaders to do great things for him. But legacy comes when he raises his organization to do great things without him. What we're talking about now is leaving a legacy. I'm in my middle 50s, and I can tell you this is more important to me than anything else now. I'm running a decent race. I'm certainly doing my best, giving it my best shot, trying to help other people. I want to continue doing that. Have no desire to ever slow down or quit. I don't even think retirement is a word that I know. But here's what I do know. I'm much more concerned about passing the baton off than I ever have before. I'm spending a lot of time with young leaders. In fact, I love to be around young leaders. I have a Catalyst conference every year in Atlanta that is for leaders under 40. There'll be between 3,000 and 4,000 young leaders here this year. And it's a great time of excitement as I share leadership principles out of my life. And I'm going to talk to them about if they could spend this year I'm going to talk about if they could spend one evening with me, here are the things that I would share with a young leader. Just words of wisdom and advice. Because I really want to pass the baton off well to someone else. In fact, I think there's really only one appropriate way to close not only this law, the law of legacy. I think there's only one way to close the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. So let me just take a moment and set the music stand aside and all the lecture notes. And let me just for, 2 minutes, 3 minutes max, let me talk to you about my leadership journey and where I am now, and what I think and what I feel. The first thing I would say to you about my journey is this. I want to make a difference. Now, that's nothing new. I've wanted to make a difference for a long time. In fact, as kind of a young person starting off in life wanting to be successful, back in the 20s, I can honestly say that I would say to you, I want to make a difference. So I worked hard and did everything that I could to make a difference. And to be honest with you, I was making a difference. And that was very good. But then I went into my 30s, and one day I realized that although I was making a difference, I wasn't hitting full stride at all. I wasn't reaching my potential. I wasn't really doing what I knew that perhaps I could do, and I knew that I wasn't idling, but I wasn't hitting full stride. So in my 30s, I went from I want to make a difference to a whole new level. I went to this level. I want to make a difference with people. That's when I began to understand that If I was really going to accomplish a lot, I was going to have to be able to lead people. That's when I began to have a passion for leadership, because all of a sudden I realized if I want to make a difference, I've got to make a difference with people. And the only way that you can make a difference with people is learning how to lead. That began me on my journey of being passionate about learning leadership. Read all the books I could read and still read all the books on leadership. If it's a leadership book, I bought it, I can guarantee you. If it's got the word leadership on it, I'm reading, I'm learning, I'm still continuing. Because I realized I want to make a difference, but I want to make a difference with people. So I began to, in my 30s, include people in my life. People that I thought could take the journey with me. As I closed my 30s, I thought, I still haven't hit my peak yet. And I want to make a difference in the 20s was good, and I want to make a difference with people in the 30s was good. But what I learned in the 30s was that a lot of the people I had join my team, they weren't helping me. So in my 40s, I went to a whole new level. See, in my 40s, I went from I want to make a difference in my 20s to I want to make a difference with people in my 30s to by the time I got 40, I was saying I want to make a difference with people, hang on now, who want to make a difference. Oh. All of a sudden, I understood the law of the inner circle, and those closest to me will determine the level of my success. And all of a sudden, I said, I'm not out to recruit people. My goal isn't people on my team. My goal is the right people on my team. And there I began to be passionate about selecting the right people and choosing and hiring well and understanding what I needed and who I wanted and having a picture and a profile of a potential leader and bringing people on whose abilities were matched with their passion. And I found that when I started wanting to make a difference with people who wanted to make a difference, everything started compounding in my life. So as I entered my 40s, I thought, hey, I'm doing pretty good. And then I realized as I turned 50, I'm still not there. There's a higher level. There's a higher level than I want to make a difference in my 20s to I want to make a difference with people in my 30s to I want to make a difference with people who want to make a difference in my 40s. You see, when I turned 50, I stepped it up again. You see, now I want to make a difference with people who want to make a difference doing something that makes a difference. All of a sudden, I began to ask myself the question, what am I living for? What am I doing this for? What's the return? And you see, that's when you begin to stake your life on things that have greater potential than yourself. That's where I decided that I wanted to add value to people because people are the only appreciable asset in any organization. That's where I began to make decisions and I began to do things that I think perhaps can last beyond me. And the reason that I'm teaching the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership to you is because I truly believe if you'll be a student of these laws, if you'll do more than write in blanks in a notebook, but you'll become a student, and every day you'll learn to lead better, and you'll talk to leaders and listen to leaders, and you'll do leadership stuff. Here's what I believe in you, and here's what I think about you, and here's what I think about our time we've spent together. Oh, the 21 Laws of Leadership, that's not the end. That's the beginning. And I only want you to learn these laws if you're committed to adding value to people. I only want you to apply these laws if you're committed to handing off the baton to the next generation and letting them go above you. Here's what I know in closing. My time with you is extremely profitable because you're going to take these laws and you're going to learn them and you're going to apply them And you're going to be better at them than I am. And although I may never meet you all personally, it's going to have a huge return. Because as you pour your life into others, as I've tried to pour my life into you, here's what I know. We'll add value to other people. And when we add value to other people, we add value to lives and organizations and communities and families. That's a good bottom line. That's worth me teaching leadership to you. Thank you very much.